I had been staring at the ceiling for hours, trying to fall asleep. That is probably why I noticed it. The smallest flicker, right above me. A red pulse. Faint but rhythmic, like a heartbeat. When I finally climbed up to check, I realized I was not supposed to see it. The first instinct was to laugh it off. It was the middle of the night, and I had not been sleeping well. I told myself it was the neighbor's television or a streetlight catching some reflective paint inside the detector. I lay back down and watched the spot as if it were some rare nocturnal animal. Nothing moved. The room breathed around me, a slow exhale from the heater, the dull click of the bathroom pipes, the refrigerator cycling on in the kitchen like a distant wave. After a long minute, the red spot came again. A single blink. Off. Then nothing. I did not get up right away. I counted to 60, then to 120. I tried to pretend I had not seen it. When you live alone, you learn to choose your battles with the dark. If you get up for every sound, you go crazy. I had promised myself that this new place would be different. No roommates, no crashing on someone's couch while they argue in the next room. Just me and 4 blank walls and a warranty on all the appliances. Safety, as long as the rent cleared. At 2:20 I got out of bed. I could say it was bravery, but it was actually a kind of annoyance. A sense that something in my space needed to be fixed and could not wait for morning. I took my phone and turned the flashlight down to the lowest brightness. The last thing I wanted was to wake myself up completely. The beam made a dull glare on the plastic face of the smoke detector. For a few seconds, there was nothing. Then the red again, a tiny pulse under the molded white circle. It came from the seam, like a reflection catching my light from inside the unit. I dragged the desk chair across the floor and climbed up in bare feet. The chair creaked. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was probably a battery indicator. I had seen those come in different colors. Maybe this brand used red. Maybe the blinking only happened when the room was quiet. Maybe it was a defect and the building would replace it in the morning. My palm went to the plastic ring and I twisted. It resisted. I twisted harder and the front plate popped loose with a tired, plasticky sigh. There was a small disc battery. There was a little dust. There was a wire that did not look like something a smoke detector would need. It was thin and new, and it curved elegantly toward the center hole as if it wanted to hide there. I held my breath. I had the ridiculous thought that if I made a sound, something would hear me listening. The red blink did not come while I was that close. I lowered the plate a few inches and angled my phone to see inside. The light caught a circle that caught it back. That is the only way I can describe the feeling. The light went in, and something smooth and dark sent it back at me in a neat, centered dot. The little wire fed into it, and the wire was taped to the interior with fresh electrical tape. The tape did not match the dust. The tape was clean. I am not proud of what I did next. I stood on the chair and did not move. There is a kind of stillness your body chooses when your mind has started to say the thing you do not want to hear. If I moved, it would be true. If I got down, if I spoke, if I let myself have the thought, it would be true. I held the plate with the wire in one hand and my phone in the other, and my arms shook, and from somewhere below the ceiling there was a tiny crack of sound, like a plastic lid being pressed into place in another room. The chair wobbled and I had to get down. On the way down, the edge of the plate scraped my knuckle and I bled a little. The smear looked absurd on the clean white plastic. I used the corner of a t-shirt to wipe it off. I put the chair back under the desk with the care of someone resetting a scene for a play. I crawled into bed and pulled the blanket to my chin and stared at the hole without the cover. The dark little circle stared back. At 3-something, I took a photo. Then I took a video of the ceiling, a slow pan that felt like proof, even though it was only a picture of a hole with a wire in it. At 3:40, when the red pulse came again, it was gentler, as if whoever was responsible knew I was watching. I say whoever because my mind refused to attach a face to it. A landlord, a prankster, a previous tenant, a contractor who was a creep. I cycled through every possible person, each one worse than the last. By 4, I decided on sleep by negotiation. I would not get up again. I would not make any calls. I would deal with it in the morning. If it was still there in the morning, it would be real. If not, I would be grateful for whatever lie came next. I slept in pieces, 5 minutes at a time, 10 maybe, enough to dream and then jolt awake. In one dream I was lying on the carpet and the camera came down from the ceiling like a spider on a thread, a neat black eye that put itself level with my own. In another, I walked into the hallway and found 3 more detectors, each one humming like a refrigerator, each one blinking without a pattern. I woke with the taste of metal in my mouth and the feeling that I had been talking, quietly and urgently, to someone who refused to answer. When the sun came through the blinds, it was a relief that made me a little nauseous. The hole was still open, the wire still fed into the void. The red pulse did not come. In the light, it looked easy to explain. A false alarm waiting to happen. A weird brand of detector. Something a maintenance worker had done halfway and forgotten. I made coffee and sat at the table and looked at my phone and then put it face down, as if that helped. I told myself I would call the building office at 9. I lasted until 8:20. The woman at the office said the detectors were all the same in every unit. She said if mine was beeping or blinking, it meant I needed to replace the battery. I told her about the wire. I told her the cover came off a little too easily and that it did not look like the other detectors I had seen. She said a lot of brands looked different. She said she could send someone to check, but it might not be today. I heard typing. I imagined my address being added to a list on a screen. I wanted to ask who installs the detectors, but I heard my own voice and it was too bright, too nervous, and I did not want to sound like the kind of tenant who turns the smallest thing into a lawsuit. I said thank you. She said no problem. She wished me a nice day. I stood under the ceiling again with the chair but did not climb up. In daylight, I could see a faint line of dust around the base where the detector had sat until last night. The line was broken. Someone had twisted it recently, not me. The angle of the smear told me that. I realized I had already made a rule for myself without thinking. I would not put the cover back on. If I put the cover back on, I was agreeing to something. The hole stayed open, a crude little mouth that said the building was not finished with me. I took the plate to the kitchen and set it on the counter. I looked up smoke detector models on my phone. All the pictures looked harmless in that fake catalog way. I typed in small wire inside smoke detector and felt ridiculous. The results made my skin feel thin. The word camera showed up. So did the phrase hidden devices. I told myself search engines feed you fear. I told myself I was primed to see the worst. I set the phone down, and I noticed the tiniest smear of black around the center hole on the plate, as if a tiny lens had been pressed there and removed. I left for work late. On the sidewalk, I kept looking up at my own windows like they would give me an answer. Every pane of glass on the block reflected the same blank morning sky. People passed me without looking. I tried to decide whether to tell anyone. The problem with a story like this is the moment you start it, you become the person who believes it. You feel yourself leave the safe world and enter the other one, the one with the red light. I sent a text to a friend that said, "I think my smoke detector is broken." That was all. They sent back a thumbs up and a question about lunch. I said, maybe. I turned my phone face down again and went inside the office and sat at my desk and tried to be a person who has always been normal. It was a relief when the day shoved other things into my head. Meetings, a broken spreadsheet, a long email from a client that came in fractured sentences as if they were out of breath. I got through it. When I stepped back into my apartment that evening, the air felt slightly colder, the way it does after you have had a fight. The hole was still open. The wire was still there. The plate lay on the counter like an accusation. I turned on the kitchen light. The bulb hummed. I thought I heard another sound then, very faint, like a whisper made of electricity. It came from above me and to the right, toward the bathroom. When I stopped moving, it stopped. I told myself it could wait one more night. I would buy a replacement. I would install it myself. I would hand the old one to the building office and ask them to please make sure the rest of the units were up to code. That felt like a nice adult plan, responsible and calm. I made dinner I did not taste and watched a show I did not understand. At 10:30, I stood under the ceiling again and made the choice that I would sleep with the lights on. I moved the desk lamp to the floor beside the bed and aimed it up as if light could fill the space behind the drywall. Around midnight, I fell asleep sideways on the blanket with the lamp still burning. I woke once to the dryness in the room and took a sip of water and listened. The apartment was quieter than it had ever been, quieter than the night before. A careful quiet, like someone holding their breath so they would not scare away an animal. I lay back down and tried to count to 100 without thinking of the word lens. At 94, I felt a draft that was not there before, a very soft thread of colder air that touched my cheek and then moved away. The lamp made a weak halo on the ceiling. I watched the ragged circle where the detector had been and felt the pressure in the room change by the smallest amount. I told myself not to sit up. I told myself not to move too quickly. I told myself I would only watch. Just watch, and if nothing happens, I would put the cover back on in the morning and pretend this never started. That is when the red pulse came, softer than the night before, a brief reminder, one beat, then gone. I waited for the second blink. It did not come. Instead, from somewhere beyond the drywall, I heard the slow rasp of something adjusting its weight on wood. The sound traveled like water through the ceiling. Then a small, careful click, as if a finger tapped plastic once to test a button. I realized my mouth was open. I closed it and swallowed and felt my throat move in the quiet room. I counted my own breaths because there was nothing else to count. 1, 2, 3. I reached without looking and found my phone on the nightstand. I pressed record. I held it against my chest so the microphone would hear only the room. I did not speak. The room did not either. Something above me exhaled again, very faint, a shift of air that was not the heater, not the vent, not anything mechanical I recognized. Then nothing. The lamp hummed. The building settled. I lay there until I could not tell whether I was shaking or the bed was moving. When at last I could hear the blood in my ears again, I stopped the recording and set the phone down. I told myself I would listen in the morning. I told myself I had proof now. It felt worse than not knowing. It felt like opening a door that had never been meant to open. I did fall asleep. Just before morning, in the gray part of the night. I dreamed I was standing on my desk chair again, only this time the ceiling was lower and the mouth of the hole was at the level of my eyes. Something breathed there, close enough to fog the rim with moisture, and I could not tell whether it was me. When I woke, the lamp had burned itself into a warm spot on the ceiling paint. The hole was patient and blank. The day was the kind of flat November day that pretends to be kind and is not. I did not look at my phone. I stood on the chair and put my ear to the seam and heard nothing. I pressed record again and left the phone on the desk under the hole. I showered and dressed, and every movement felt like a sound I was making inside a library. When I picked up the phone, the second recording was nothing but the thin hiss of a room waiting. I told myself there was still time to be normal. There was always a last chance to be normal. I got my keys, I put my hand on the door, then I went back to the counter and picked up the smoke detector plate. I turned it over in my hands and found the smallest scratch on the interior rim, a crescent where someone had used a tool to pry something free. I could see it because I knew to look. I could see it because, whether I liked it or not, I had started to become the kind of person who knows what to look for. When I left the apartment, I locked the door and pressed my forehead to the cool wood for a moment. On the other side of the ceiling, something waited. It had waited before I noticed. It would wait after. The last thing I heard, before the hallway swallowed me, was a delicate sound from inside my place, like a plastic lid being pressed into place, quiet and careful, as if not to wake me. I worked through the day as if nothing had happened. That's what people do when something unexplainable touches the edge of their lives. They build a shape around it, something small enough to fit between coffee breaks and unread emails. I told myself I was tired. I told myself I overreacted. I told myself that the sound behind the door had been my imagination, trying to make a story out of nothing. By noon, I had almost convinced myself. At lunch, I scrolled through listings for hidden cameras. I told myself it was research, but the images made me sick. Every object in those thumbnails looked like something in my apartment. A clock, a charger, a smoke detector, even a light bulb. The descriptions said things like discreet and completely wireless. One model looked exactly like the plate sitting on my kitchen counter. It had an infrared sensor and recorded sound. I closed the tab, cleared my history, and stared at the blank browser page until I remembered to breathe. When I got home that night, the apartment felt wrong again. Not dangerous, not exactly, just altered. The air was heavier, as if someone had walked through it too recently. The faint smell of cleaning fluid that used to comfort me now made my stomach twist. I walked through each room slowly, forcing myself to touch the familiar things. Countertops, light switches, the arm of the couch, like a ritual. Everything was where it should be. Except the chair. I always kept the desk chair tucked under the table. It was still there, but turned slightly toward the hallway, just a few inches, a small, meaningless detail that still made the back of my neck tighten. I turned it back and told myself I'd probably bumped it that morning. The problem was, I remembered not doing that. I remembered how careful I had been when I left, how I had placed everything back exactly where it belonged. I looked up at the hole in the ceiling. The wire hung the same as before, limp, innocent. But the dust around it was disturbed again, a faint smudge that hadn't been there yesterday. I stood on the chair, phone flashlight in hand, and listened. At first I heard nothing. Then, like someone whispering through cloth, came the faintest sound. Not from the phone, not from anywhere I could name, just the ghost of a radio signal alive inside the ceiling. I froze. The noise faded. The heater kicked on, covering everything with its dull mechanical sigh. I climbed down, heart hammering, and sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't look at the ceiling again. That night, I slept on the couch with the lights on. I woke around 3:15 to the sound of something moving above me. Slow, dragging, rhythmic. The sound of weight shifting across beams. I held my breath and waited for it to stop, but it didn't. It moved from the ceiling over the bedroom toward the kitchen, pausing now and then, like whoever was up there was being careful not to make too much noise. When it stopped directly above me, the silence was worse than the sound. I felt the urge to run, but run where? I was barefoot, in a t-shirt, and outside it was 20 degrees. I told myself to stay still. The noise returned, lighter this time, crawling back toward the bedroom. I could almost trace the path by sound alone. When it reached the place above my bed, I heard a soft, mechanical whine, like a lens focusing. I didn't sleep again. I sat on the couch until the gray of morning pushed through the blinds. I called the police. I didn't want to. I could already picture the look on the officer's face, the one they save for unstable tenants and drunks who call about ghosts. But when you've heard someone moving inside your ceiling, reason becomes a luxury. I told them I suspected someone had installed a camera in my apartment. The dispatcher asked if I had evidence. I said yes. I said I had removed it and I could show them. 2 officers arrived an hour later. They were polite, detached. One took notes while the other inspected the detector plate. He looked inside and frowned. "This is just a regular sensor," he said. "You sure it wasn't a smoke alarm?" "I'm sure," I said. "It blinked. It recorded." He looked up at the ceiling hole. "There's a crawl space between floors," he said. "Could have been maintenance wiring. Some units have extra detectors for the sprinkler system." I asked if that explained the sound of someone crawling overhead at 3 in the morning. He didn't answer. He offered to take a quick look in the attic from the end of the hall, but the hatch was locked, and apparently only management had the key. They left me with a card and told me to call if I found more devices. Their tone said they didn't expect I would. After they left, I sat in the hallway outside my door for a long time. I didn't want to go back in. The card they gave me felt heavy in my hand. I could see my own shaky handwriting on the edge of it. My name, my number, my apartment. Somewhere above, a faint vibration hummed through the drywall. Maybe pipes, maybe not. That evening, I went to a hardware store and bought a stepladder and a cheap motion detector. The clerk joked about catching raccoons. I smiled like it was funny. Back home, I checked every room, bathroom vent, kitchen light fixture, even behind the smoke detector in the living room. That's when I found the second one. It was smaller than the first. Hidden behind the vent grill, no bigger than a coin. A new wire snaked through insulation that was still soft, as if someone had disturbed it recently. When I pulled it free, something shifted above me, a sudden, dry rustle, followed by silence. That was the moment I knew it wasn't just me. I sealed the vent with tape, packed a bag, and called a friend from work. I told her I needed a place to crash for the night. I didn't explain why. She didn't ask. From her couch, I tried to sleep. But sometime around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed with a notification from an unknown Wi-Fi network. It asked to connect automatically. The name of the network was my apartment number. I turned off my phone and sat in the dark until morning. The next day, I returned to gather a few things and hand over the camera to the police. The building felt wrong the second I stepped inside, too still, like everyone else had quietly moved out. I climbed the stairs, every step, a sound that didn't belong in the silence. My door was unlocked. I stopped breathing. Inside, nothing looked disturbed. My bag was gone, though, the one I'd left near the couch with a few clothes. The hole in the ceiling was covered again, the plate screwed back in place as if it had never been removed. The wire was gone. I walked through the room slowly, touching nothing. The desk chair was back under the table, perfectly straight. The air smelled faintly of bleach. I stood there until my knees felt weak and my vision blurred around the edges. Then I turned and left. I didn't even lock the door behind me. That night, I checked into a cheap hotel near the edge of town. I didn't tell anyone where. The walls there were thin, but honest. You could hear other people breathing. It was almost comforting. Around midnight, my phone buzzed again. Unknown number, no message, just a video file. I almost deleted it, but something in me already knew what it was. I watched anyway. The angle was familiar. My bedroom ceiling. The frame captured the bed, the lamp, my body curled under the blanket. The timestamp said 3:17 a.m., the night I'd left the apartment. I watched myself sleep for 32 seconds before the camera tilted slightly, revealing a hand lowering the vent grill in the corner. It was gloved, careful. The lens caught a glimpse of someone's arm, dressed in dark fabric, moving with practiced ease. Then, for half a second, the figure turned toward the camera. It wasn't a face I recognized, just a shape. But in that single blurred frame, I could see my own desk lamp reflected in their eyes. The video ended there. I stared at the screen until it dimmed, until my reflection replaced the frozen image. I tried to call the number back, but it was already disconnected. When I finally put the phone down, I realized the room had gone completely silent. Even the heater had stopped. I looked up at the ceiling out of instinct, then immediately wished I hadn't. There, above the bed, a small round shape caught the light from my phone and blinked once, soft red, almost polite. I told myself it had to be the smoke detector. I told myself it couldn't follow me. But the pulse came again, steady this time, like a heartbeat I couldn't hear but could feel. That was the last night I tried to sleep. I didn't check out of the hotel the next morning. I packed my bag, walked down to the parking lot, sat in the car, and stayed there for an hour. The engine wasn't on. I just stared at the hotel windows, waiting for one of them to blink red. None did. The silence in the car felt too complete, like the world had decided to hold its breath until I left town. I thought about driving somewhere far. But where do you go when you can't trust walls? I told myself it was overreaction, exhaustion, trauma from being watched. Maybe it was all explainable. Maybe I had misread everything. But then I'd see that red light again in my head, pulsing in the dark, patient as a heartbeat. It didn't matter that it wasn't there anymore. Once you see something like that, it keeps watching you from inside. By afternoon, I convinced myself to go back one last time, not to stay, just to see the building in daylight, maybe talk to the landlord. Closure. That word sounded safe. The office was empty when I arrived. The door was unlocked, lights off. On the desk sat a half-empty cup of coffee gone cold and a clipboard with maintenance requests. My name was on the list, written in someone else's handwriting. The date was yesterday. Next to it, a single word, resolved. I felt something twist inside me. I didn't remember anyone resolving anything. The hallway to my unit smelled faintly chemical, like detergent mixed with something metallic. I stopped outside my door. It was closed now, locked again. I shouldn't have, but I tried the key. It turned smoothly. The air inside was colder than before, sharp enough to sting my throat. Everything was perfect. The plate was back on the smoke detector. The chair was under the desk. Even the small smear of blood from my knuckle was gone, wiped away so cleanly that I wondered if I'd imagined it. The kitchen counter gleamed. The sink was dry. Nothing looked lived in. I turned in a slow circle. For a moment, I felt like I was standing in a replica of my life, a careful reconstruction of everything I'd touched, down to the angle of my coffee mug. Someone had been here long enough to memorize me. I called the landlord's number. It rang once, then a voice I didn't recognize answered. Male, calm, distant. Management office, he said. I asked for the woman I'd spoken to before. She's not here, he said. Can I help you? I explained that I was a tenant, that I'd had a maintenance issue with a smoke detector, that someone must have entered my apartment without permission. There was a pause long enough to feel like a silence I wasn't supposed to fill. Then the man said, "We don't handle that property anymore." And he hung up. I stood there holding the phone like it could still warm me. The faint hum of the refrigerator broke the quiet. For a second, it almost sounded like a laugh. I should have left then. I didn't. Instead, I climbed onto the chair again. I unscrewed the detector plate, slower this time. The plastic felt too new, too soft. Inside was another wire, not taped this time, clean. Embedded directly into the drywall. The red light blinked once, then went dead. I pulled harder, and a section of plaster cracked, exposing a small hole that led into darkness. I thought I saw movement, but it could have been my reflection in the phone screen. Then a sound came from inside the wall, deliberate, like someone dragging a finger across the wood. I climbed down, heart hammering, and backed away. The sound followed me, a faint scuttling that shifted direction as I moved. It wasn't random, it was tracking me. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the flashlight from my drawer, and aimed it at the ceiling seam. The sound stopped. The silence felt aware, like it was listening. Then came a low creak above the hallway, like someone crawling back toward the vent. I recorded everything. My hands were shaking so bad the footage was useless, blurry streaks of ceiling in darkness. I uploaded it to cloud storage anyway. Habit. Proof. Something to leave behind. When the police arrived again, I told them there was someone inside the walls. I expected disbelief, but the older officer, the one who dismissed me before, looked almost tired. He said they'd had reports of squatters in other buildings nearby. Homeless people breaking into attics, living off crawl spaces. It sounded reasonable enough until I remembered the camera, the recordings, the precision. "Can you check?" I asked. He sighed, motioned for his partner, and they fetched a ladder. The younger one climbed up and pushed open the ceiling hatch in the hall. Dust rained down. He shone his flashlight into the dark and froze. "What?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He handed down a small object wrapped in cloth. When I unfolded it, I found a camera, professional, compact, coated in dust, but still warm to the touch. Its lens glinted like a wet eye. "There's more up there," the officer said quietly. "You might want to step outside." I did. They spent 20 minutes in the ceiling. When they came down, both men looked pale. They had found a small sleeping area blankets, water bottles, empty food containers, a monitor showing multiple live feeds. The police said the wires connected to an external signal routed through the building's Wi-Fi. Someone had been watching several apartments, not just mine. They told me they'd contact the owner of the property. They told me to find somewhere else to stay for a few days. I left without another word. That night, I stayed in another hotel. Different city. I locked the door, stuffed the towel under the gap, and unplugged every device that had a light on it. I sat on the floor until my legs went numb. Around 2 a.m., my phone lit up again. Unknown number. One new message. It was a photo. I didn't open it right away. The thumbnail showed a bed, sheets I recognized. The pattern was mine. When I finally tapped it, the image filled the screen, me, asleep in the hotel room, light from my phone still visible on the nightstand. I checked the timestamp. 10 minutes ago. I dropped the phone and ran to the door, yanking it open so hard the chain broke. The hallway was empty, quiet, too bright under the fluorescent lights. No footsteps, no doors closing, nothing. Just that endless silence of places meant for temporary living. I came back inside and locked the door again. I shoved the dresser against it. I sat with my back to the wall until morning. By the time the sun came through, the photo was gone from my phone. The number no longer existed. I stopped calling the police. I stopped checking into hotels. I stopped telling anyone where I was. I moved every few weeks, paid cash, kept my phone off at night. It didn't help. Every place has a ceiling. Every ceiling has a point where the shadows gather, just enough to hide a small red pulse that might be nothing, or might be something waiting for me to look up. The last time I saw it was last week. Different city, new building, fresh paint, white walls, no vents directly above the bed. I'd checked everything twice. I'd even taken apart the smoke detectors before moving in, just to be sure. That night, I woke at 3:17 a.m. without knowing why. The room was dark, the air was still. I lay there for a moment thinking maybe I'd finally escaped it. Then I saw the reflection on the window. Not in the glass, but on it, faint red, pulsing softly in time with my breath. It wasn't coming from inside the room. It was coming from the hallway, just beyond the door. I turned off the light on instinct, let the dark swallow everything. The pulse continued, steady and patient. It wasn't a camera this time. It wasn't a phone. It was a tiny, perfect dot hovering just above the floor, aimed at the base of the door, blinking like it knew I was still awake. I sat there and watched it until morning, counting each blink until the sun drowned it in daylight. When I finally opened the door, the hallway was empty. No wires, no device, no sound. Just a single piece of paper taped to the wall opposite my door. It was a maintenance notice. Written in neat letters at the top, smoke detector inspection scheduled for tomorrow. No signature, no company name. Just my new address, typed correctly this time. And under it, one word handwritten in black ink, resolved. I moved the notice into a drawer and told myself it was a joke. That was the only way I could still move through the day. I made coffee and burned the first cup and stood with my hand on the counter long enough for the heat to leave a red mark on my palm. I left the apartment at noon and came back at 3, as if keeping strange hours would make me harder to measure. When I opened the door, the air felt wrong, like someone had just exhaled and stepped out of sight. I checked the detectors again. I told myself this was what sane people did. They verified. They documented. Both were clean, identical, stamped with a brand I recognized from the hardware store. I tapped the test button and jumped when the alarm shrieked. It felt like calling my own bluff. When the sound died, the silence returned to the room like a person returning to their seat. At dusk, I forced myself to go for a walk. I needed neighbors, other bodies, the noise of someone else's life. The building was full of doors, and none of them opened. A couple carried groceries past me and did not look up. On the sidewalk, a child held a red balloon, and for a second, my heart clenched so hard, my vision blurred. The color was wrong in my head now. It would always be wrong. When I came back, there was a slip of paper under my door. A second notice. The same language, the same printed fields locked in neat black boxes. This one had my name spelled with an extra letter, like a hand had hesitated and then kept going. Under inspection window, someone had written between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. I laughed out loud. The sound felt like it came from someone farther down the hall. I put the second notice in the drawer with the first and pushed the drawer closed. The fit was too tight, wood rubbing on wood, a small complaint I could almost mistake for a voice if I wanted to. That night I didn't pretend to sleep. I sat up with the lamp off and the phone on the nightstand and my back against the headboard. I told myself I wouldn't look at the door. I lasted 10 minutes. The hallway was quiet. Every quiet hallway in the world is the same, a long throat that leads to nothing. The only light was the one coming under the door from the exit sign around the corner, a dim, sweet green that made the bottom edge of the door glow. I thought about leaving then, at 1:40, picking up my bag and walking out and never coming back for anything I had left behind. But people follow routines even when those routines lead them into rooms where they have already been hurt. There is comfort in the illusion of the next right thing. If I left now, the night would still exist somewhere else. It would follow me. I stayed. At 2:04, the faintest static began inside the walls. It was not a sound so much as a pressure, a soft weight against the air, like the building had grown a second skin and I was inside it. I sat very still. I looked up at the smoke detector and it looked back the way innocent objects look, back when you accuse them. The static grew closer to a sound, the suggestion of a whisper without vowels or consonants. Once, long ago, I had fallen asleep with old television snow filling the room, and this reminded me of that, except it came from above, where no signal should reach. I reached for the phone and opened the camera and pointed it at the ceiling. The screen filled with gray. I turned on the flashlight and the beam pushed the dark apart. No red pulse, no movement. Just the quiet seam of drywall and the white eye of the device that would pass any inspection and tell anyone who asked that I was crazy. At 2:40, a soft creak bled through the ceiling, the sound of weight carefully moving over beams. It came from the hall above the bedroom, then paused, then came again. It felt familiar the way old injuries feel familiar when the weather changes. It was careful. It had learned my rooms. It had learned me. I stood up very slowly and moved into the living room and sat on the floor with my back to the wall. I could see both the bedroom door and the front door from there. The static eased and returned like breathing. I counted the space between the creaks and could not find a pattern. I told myself to call someone and then realized there was no one left that I could call without turning them into a place for the sound to go next. At 3:17 exactly, my phone vibrated once. Unknown number. No message, just a live link, like a video call. I stared at it until it dimmed, then woke it again and stared some more. The air in the room felt thinner, as if every sound I was not making was being kept for later. I answered. The first image was black. Then the lens adjusted and I saw texture, some kind of crosshatch pattern, fibers lit from very close. The camera pulled back slowly and the pattern became a vent grill, like the one I had taped in the last apartment, like the one I had insisted this building did not have above the bed. It moved further back and I realized the vent was not in a ceiling. It was in a wall. The frame tilted, wider now, and I saw my own bedroom through the grill. The bed. The lamp. The dark door. It was a view from inside the space between my wall and the outside corridor. The phone's speakers were turned all the way down, but I could hear something anyway, a pressure change shaped into a whisper by the shape of the room. I watched myself, in miniature this time, reflected as a smudge on the black glass of the nightstand. The angle shifted again, closer to the door, and the viewer stopped. The tiny hole of the peephole glowed. A fingertip covered it and slid away. Then the frame took one quick breath, and the image died. The call ended. The number dissolved into unknown. My phone returned me to my own face. I did not move for a long time. The building did not either. After a while, the static ebbed, and the hallway outside made one human sound, footsteps passing, a key in a lock, the sigh of a door. It was almost funny. I had been begging the universe for footsteps. Now they were useless. At dawn, there was a knock. It was small, a polite, official knock. 3 taps. I stood up and felt the ache in my legs from sitting still too long. I did not go to the door. The knock came again. 3 taps. I put my hand on the wall and felt nothing. I put my eye to the peephole and saw nothing. That was worse than seeing anything would have been. I stood there, breathing shallow, while the green light from the exit sign painted the base of the door. A slip of paper pushed under the gap. It moved like a tongue. When it cleared the edge, it fluttered once and lay still. Footsteps faded. A door down the hall opened and closed. The building held its breath and then pretended it had never done any of this. I picked up the paper. It was the same form. A third notice. This one was blank except for a single small box checked in ballpoint pen. Inspector may enter without tenant present. No date, no name, no window of time. I called my job and said I was sick. I turned off my phone. I put it in the freezer like a charm from a story that might have worked once. I sat on the floor again and closed my eyes and listened to the apartment settle around me into something like a person I used to know. I tried to remember the last time I had spoken out loud in my own home and could not. The things I needed to say did not work in the presence of walls. I thought about leaving a note for whoever would come after me. I imagined the note found in a drawer years from now. The words blurred with damp, a warning to people who would think they were different because their rent was higher or their hallways brighter. The knock did not come back that day. No one entered. When night fell, the dark lay down in all the old places. I watched it find the corners like a dog finding its bed. I told myself I would leave in the morning. I packed a bag and left it by the door. I slept sitting up again because lying flat felt like trusting something. At 3:17, I woke without knowing I had fallen asleep. The room was a box of soft sounds, the small electricity of blood in my ears, the breath that cannot disguise itself as anything else. The red pulse came from nowhere and everywhere at once. It touched the window and returned. It touched the ceiling paint and returned. It touched the lens of my own eye and returned, a rhythm I could not control. A blink. A pause. Another blink. I did not move. I did not record. I did not look for a source. I understood, finally, that the source was the part of the night that learns how to be seen. There is a point where fear becomes a schedule. It was easier after that. In the morning, I took the bag and left the apartment and locked the door and slid the key into the manager's mailbox. I did not leave a note. I walked past the office window and did not look in. I went down the steps and did not count them. I turned the corner and did not look back. The cold found my lungs and tried to make a home there, and I let it because at least it was honest. For a few days, I stayed with a man who rented a room by the week. He gave me a key with a number scratched into it with a knife. The room had a wet spot on the ceiling shaped like a continent and a smoke detector so old its plastic had yellowed to the color of teeth. At night, trucks passed on the highway and rolled their sound over the building in waves. I liked that. It left less room for other things. On the third night, the power went out for 2 hours. The first hour was loud, everyone complaining, phones glowing in weak squares. The second hour was quiet, the kind of quiet that finds the exact place inside a human where their bones start to feel like glass. When the lights came back, the detector above the bed blinked once. It did not blink again. I sat up for a long time waiting to see if it would do it once more, because one blink could be anything, and 2 blinks become a pattern that belongs to someone. The ceiling stayed dull and innocent. The room held still. The trucks kept going. My body did not know what to do with the mercy of nothing happening. I slept for a while without dreaming. When I woke, the sky outside the window was a pale color that means morning, or an empty television, or the inside of an eye. I brushed my teeth and looked at myself in the mirror and thought I saw the reflection lag by a fraction of a second, and then I realized I had simply blinked and wanted to call it something else. I do not have an ending. I do not have a name to give you, or a person to blame, or a single good piece of advice to turn into a lesson. People like conclusions because they are a door you get to close. This isn't that. This is a corridor where the lights hum. This is the part of the story where you keep walking, because stopping is the same as being found. I change rooms. I pay cash. I test every detector and tape every vent, and somewhere there will always be a seam I cannot see. Someone will post a notice with my address spelled 2 different ways. Someone will write the word resolved where the word wrong belongs. At 3:17 a.m., somewhere, a red pulse will touch a wall and come back to life against the inside of an eye. Sometimes, when I am tired enough to feel kind, I imagine there was never a person at all. That the watching is just what happens when a building pays attention for too long. That the walls learned the shape of me and stayed hungry when I left. There is comfort in imagining a house can miss you the way a person could. It is easier than believing someone is still following and will be there in whatever room I choose next, waiting for my breath to echo on their side of the wall. If you are listening, if you are the kind of person who stares at the ceiling longer than most, if a red light has ever blinked in a place you were sure had no heartbeat, do not tell yourself it means nothing. Do not tell yourself a story that ends with relief. Some things don't end. They lower their faces to the seam and breathe with you until you fall asleep. And in the morning, when you open your eyes and the light fills the room and you are certain you dreamed, you will find a slip of paper on the floor just inside your door. No signature, no logo. Just your name, spelled the right way for once, and a single box checked. Inspection complete.